Make it happen. Pult felt his blood surge, and he fought back the instinct to duck as he felt the boatsman's eyes pass over his position. Training and experience had taught him that any sudden movement would be sure to give his position away. Better to hold still and trust to cover and camouflage to keep him hidden. In the back of his head he could hear Carp, one of his oldest ancestors, urging him to stay still, wrapping him in a fervour that ensured every muscle stayed frozen. As swiftly as it had come, the tiny boat, barely more than a dugout, moved on. He relaxed, breathing out and feeling his ancestor leave his mind to retreat back over the howling abyss. He'd been here nearly a week now, slowly moving through the dank marshes, looking for signs of potential rebellion among the mouldering settlements that were scattered across these fens, hoping to find some spark that the Empire may fan into a flame. He smiled wryly to himself as he mused. The idea of trying to set the marsh on fire seemed an apt analogy for the difficulty he faced. There were hundreds of orcs living in the marshes, but watching the way they acted around the Druge, the best word to describe them would be craven. They bowed low. They never talked back, no matter what was said. They suffered indignities in silence. Maybe it was the soul-crushing miasma that suffused everything here. Pult had felt it as soon as he'd slipped over the border into the Sarengrave, a twisted pallor clawing at his spirit, playing on his fears. Only held at bay the aura that drove him to seek out the source of the threat. Without the anointing urging him to work with his fellow scouts, he was certain he would have found a reason to put this dangerous expedition off. What would it be like to face the miasma without the way of virtue to armour his soul? He shuddered to think on it. It was no surprise that the boat people of the flats had no will to resist the Druge when they were born into the miasma. There was no enthusiasm for a fight here, not yet, but he was eager to report back it was not for the lack of wanting it. They never raised their voices to the Druge, but he'd seen for himself the way they tensed when the Druge were around, a sure sign that their ancestors were urging them to attack. He had observed the cold intensity in their eyes when the Druge turned their backs on them, a seething hate that bubbled to the surface when the Druge were present but not observing them. If these people had the weapons to fight the Druge, if they had the will, well, then the marsh would soon catch fire. Overview. To commission Gracia y Lopez Eguerria to appraise an opportunity for Imperial citizens to use the spy network in Sarengrave to incite, coordinate and support slave uprising and raids in that territory for the purpose of causing economic and military damage to the Druge. Proposed by Temeshwar. Seconded by Redoubt. At the recent summit, the Imperial Senate passed a motion instructing Gracia y Lopez Eguerria of the Prognosticators' Office to carry out an appraisal to identify an opportunity to inspire an uprising in Sarengrave. The Senate instructed Gracia to confine her research to only those solutions that employed the existing spy network in the territory. Sarengrave is the southwestern territory of the Malum, the empire ruled by the tyrannical Druge. The land is a mixture of fecund marsh and rich forests, with both crops and herd animals in great profusion. There are 3 clans of Druge in the Sarengrave. The south is dominated by the Thornswelf clan, the northern regions are controlled by the banded snake, and the eastern regions are under the control of the marsh lizard. These 3 powerful clans rule over a number of smaller clans, septs of subject orcs, and a few handfuls of humans. The Druge are secure in their dominion of the Sarengrave. In addition to instructing Gracia to carry out a full appraisal, as the Senate asked, Gerard LaSalle asked the other senior prognosticators to provide a few thoughts of their own, in the hope that the Senate will find his thoughts useful in either assessing how to proceed in Sarengrave or in determining the course of future appraisals. Graziana's assessment. The brilliant freeborn prognosticator is delighted to have received such a worthy assignment from the Senate. She is able to quickly confirm that the desire is there to overthrow the rules of the Sarengrave. These people loathe the Druge with every fibre of their being, and would like nothing more than to see them destroyed. The problem is convincing them that they have any chance of success if they rise up. The Druge control of the Sarengrave is absolute. They have faced no threats to their rule here in living memory. The idea of a life without the Druge seems little more than a fever dream to most of the people who live here. To raise a weapon against the Druge is death. A swiftly summary execution if you are fortunate, a horrific drawn-out murder if you are not. To have any chance of success, the Empire would need to achieve 2 things. They would need to covertly funnel weapons and armour into the territory, and they would need to find a way to convince the inhabitants that they would have any chance of success. Arming the septs. There are 3 potential septs, distinct groups, that the Empire could provide with weapons and armour. The Empire could pass a single Senate motion to arm one of the Sarengrave septs. The Empire could pass a single Senate motion to arm all of the Sarengrave septs. It would take 6 months to complete and cost 100 wains of mithril and 50 thrones for each sept. There are 3 sept in the Sarengroves who have the numbers and organisation to fight the Druj. The Empire could approach 1, 2, or 3 of them with a view of arming them for an uprising. To have any chance of success, they would need to be supplied with weapons and armour. In Graziana's plan, these would be smuggled into the territory into the existing spy network and distributed from there to the septs. The cost for this would not be cheap. In effect, the Empire would be paying to help raise 1 or more armies. That is notoriously costly, requiring huge amounts of mithril, and that is when carried out in safety in the Empire. To arm a sept would require 100 wains of mithril and cost 50 thrones. It would take 6 months to complete, assuming that the mithril and the money were provided without delay. Once complete, the sept would have control of a single army with a maximum army strength of 5,000 and a starting strength of 3,000. The army would have the quality green, representing its lack of experience. A green army can only use balanced attack and solid defense orders. They lose the green quality after they complete 3 seasons of active campaigning. There are 3 septs the Empire could approach, either individually or collectively. They are the Bloodwater Spears. The Bloodwater Spears are the largest of the 3 septs, living all amongst the banks of the Fever Water. They are skilled spearfishers and could make a formidable fighting force if they were provided with armour and enough weapons to replace their wooden fishing spears. The leader of the Bloodwater Spears is a young matriarch named Halix Fireeyes, who is said to have a notoriously short temper, something very unusual for any subject of the Druj. The Bloodwater Spears live in Bloodwater Marsh and the Whisperwood. The Waterwalkers. The Waterwalkers are the most dispersed of the 3 septs, with members spread out across the marshes of the Sarengrave. They serve the Druj by operating rafts, coracles, and small boats which they use to ferry materials and people across the treacherous wastes. The leader of the Waterwalkers is an old orc named Agosar, who is apparently blind, having put his eyes out in exchange for a boon for his people from a creature the Waterwalkers call Black Feathers. The Waterwalkers travel around the Sarengrave on their small boats but maintain a number of small settlements across the Col and the Turin Flats. The Grinboar. The Grinboar are a human sept living on the edges of the ruins of Binatl Toll, the site of a Valorn heart. The Grinboar send small expeditions into the infected forest looking for relics and peculiar plants for their Druj overlords. The Grinboar are ruled by a monarch. They apparently appoint a new king or queen every 9 years on the death of the previous ruler. Their current leader is Queen Olwena, who is said to be a shrewd, canny woman. The Grinboar live in Nesutak Forest, but make regular forays into Bendol. Inciting the septs. It is not enough to arm the septs. They would also have to believe they could win against the Druj before they would consider rising up against their overlords. This is not going to be easy. They hate the Druj, but they fear them more than they hate them. The septs are not completely broken like the Sandfishers of Ossium were, but they're still a long way from being able to rise up to fight the Druj. Gracinia rates their current morale as craven. To be ready to rebel, the Empire would need to raise the morale of the septs from craven through cowed to fearful, then discouraged, and finally to resolved. At that point, they would have the nerve to attack the Druj. It wouldn't be necessary to incite a revolt, but it would be possible to lift their morale beyond resolved to reach confident and potentially assured. Gracinia has identified several potential actions that the Empire could take, each of which would serve to improve the morale of the septs by 1 place. With the exception of inciting a visible defeat on the Druj, each sept can only benefit from each action once. Gracinia is not an expert on diplomacy, so her insight into what might be sufficient to persuade the septs to rebel is not definitive. While neither of her peers at the prognosticator's office has been in a position to explore other options, they have provided some ideas for potential alternatives that the Empire could look into were they so minded. Contact with the Winter Sun. The First Imperial Orc Army contains many orcs who are fiercely committed to bringing freedom to the enemies of the Empire. If the Winter Sun were stationed in a neighbouring territory under Imperial control, currently just Thurunin, then they could issue an order to break the chains, allowing them to defend Thurunin from attack whilst targeting a single sept in the Sarengrave. Each sept they spent a season working with the Winter Sun would have their confidence boosted. The Winter Sun could only boost the morale of a sept once in this way. The Winter Sun would also gain the same benefits when attacking the Druj in the Sarengrave using the Break the Chains order. Overwhelming support. If all 3 septs are arms, then the confidence of each will be boosted. Funneling mithril to a sept will give them the ability to arm themselves ready for a fight, but won't be enough to convince them to rise up. What would boost their confidence is if the Empire chose to arm all 3 of the independent septs in the Sarengrave. If each sept knew that the other 2 had completed preparations for the armed uprising, then the morale of each sept would be boosted. A signed treaty of support. The Empire could attempt to make contact with Halix Fireeyes, Argossa, or Queen Olwena with a view to creating a treaty promising military support. If the Empire promised to commit 3 or more Imperial armies to the Sarengrave to support an uprising, any sept that has a signed treaty approved by the Imperial Senate promising military support will have their morale boosted. A signed treaty of independence. The septs of the Sarengrave are not friends of the Empire. They loathe the Druj, but that does not mean they are ready to welcome the Empire with open arms. They are suspicious of the motives of anyone offering support or aid. The Empire could allay these fears by signing a treaty promising to support the independence of the Sarengrave. Any sept that has a signed treaty approved by the Imperial Senate promising to recognise their independent control of 2 or more regions of the Sarengrave will have their morale boosted. Inflict a visible defeat. The Empire has recently inflicted a crushing defeat on the Druj, taking Ossium from them, but that territory is far away from the Sarengrave. The idea that anyone could defeat the Druj is difficult for many of the inhabitants of the Sarengrave to believe. However, there are 2 neighbouring territories controlled by the Druj next to the Sarengrave, each of which could be used to demonstrate that the Druj are not unbeatable. If the Empire drove the Druj from Zenith, or they conquered the Barons and took the territory from the Druj, then either would serve to boost the morale of the septs. If both conquests were fully complete, then that would improve the morale of every sept twice. Naomi's comments. Naomi of Virtue's Rest is known for producing appraisals that are focused on finding the most diplomatic possible solution. As an alternative approach to arming the septs, she suggests that the Empire could have explored possible diplomatic routes. The Empire has had mixed success with working with the Aksu, but it's not impossible that it might be possible to persuade them to help supporting an uprising in Sarengrave. The territory borders on one of their own lands, and they would surely benefit from any chaos here. An even better option from a diplomatic overture would be the Great Forest Orcs and their allies the Daurfell Briars. She believes that the former are distant relatives of the Bloodwater Spears. Any kinship would surely help. The latter are notorious anarchists, practitioners of the false virtue of freedom. While that would present clear legal difficulties that might need to be overcome, it would seem likely that we could provide an effective weapon in inciting the septs to rise up and claim their freedom. If the Empire wants the slaves of the Sarengrave to be able to fight for their freedom, then Graziana's plan to equip them with mithril weapons and armour is probably the only option. However, Naomi would have explored options to work with potential allies to convince the slaves to side with the Empire when Imperial armies invaded the Sarengrave. Lutomeisler's comments. Lutomeisler Nigoslavia is an experienced Kabbalist who prefers to use magic to address complex solutions like this. When asked to comment on the appraisal, she suggests that her best course of action would be to try to make contact with Irahara. The being is no ally of the Druj, and might be amenable to helping any efforts to free the inhabitants of the Sarengrave Druj rule. If the Empire built a fane for Papa Otek on the border between Therunin and the Sarengrave, it would have allowed the Prince with 1,000 foes to send his agents into Druj lands to spread chaos. She points to the recent success of the Archmage of Day using the Imperial ritual to persuade the Tamazi to act. Negotiations with the Right Eternals may have created opportunities to cast 1 or more effective curses on the territory, which would have weakened the Druj's hold. In particular, she suspects that one of the Winter Eternals might have been persuaded to help, but provides no more details than her saying that if you can't work it out, then it wouldn't help to know. Kick against the pricks. Conjunction. The information presented here details the background and objectives for 1 or more conjunctions of the Sentinel Gate. Details relating to the day, timing, gate size and additional information will be summarised on the Wind of War page for the event. Imperial spies in the Sarengrave have observed the Druj capture one of the Bloodwater Spears. It may be too late to save the Orc who's being tortured to death, but this is an opportunity to find out more about the Sarengrave. The Imperial Senate authorised a Senate motion proposed by the Senator for Temeshwar, introducing the Prognostica's office to look at ways to use the spy network in the Sarengrave to try and foment an uprising. One of the potential targets they identified was the Bloodwater Spears, a sept of orcs that live on the banks of the Fever Water and who suffer under the tyranny of the Druj. At the last moment, as the summit approaches, word arrives from Imperial spies that a large band of Druj have captured one of the Bloodwater Spears and are in the process of torturing the orc to death. It's not clear why, whether the orc has any information they want, or whether it is simply the Druj taking their sport where they can. Whatever the reason, this is an opportunity to intervene in the Sarengrave, find out more about what is happening there, and potentially gain useful allies. This potential is confirmed by the existence of a large conjunction to Deadstone Woods, a large area of woodland near the banks of the Fever Water, which is where the Orc Poisoner was being held. Given their obvious interest in the area, the civil service suggests that if the Senator for Temeshwar can arrange a group of heroes to intercept the Druj, then they may be able to steal a march in the territory. The civil service suggests that the group include a skilled negotiator in case the prisoner can be rescued before the orc is killed, and a magician who can cast Voice for the Dead in case they don't arrive in time. Success and failure. Identifying and rescuing the Bloodwalker Spear Orc will provide an opportunity to gain information about the situation in Sarengrave, and potentially offer advantages to diplomacy for the Sept of Orcs. If the Druj succeed in torturing their prisoner to death, the Empire may still be able to gain information, but the opportunity for diplomacy will be lost.